Hey everyone, I'm KTG Bomb. Today's topic is the 2026 updated Metalstorm tier table. So looking back, I put out a video on this topic about a year ago. But since then, a lot of jets have gone through buffs and nerfs through various patches. And recently we had a massive system overhaul with Upgrade 2.0. So I'm going to break down which jets are sitting in the top tiers right now, which owns are worth flying, and on the flip side, which ones fall into the lower tiers, all from my perspective as Bomb YG. All right, let's get into it. We'll go through things in hangar order. First up is the F5 Tiger. I'm putting this one in D tier. Most people's default impression of the Tiger is that it's a weak jet, a pretty lackluster one overall. Bringing a Tiger to an important squad battle? I've actually seen people get roasted for it. Let's take a look at the Tiger's stats. It's a light fighter with 100 HP, a decent 39-degree turn rate, and a top-class sustained turn time of 13.8 seconds. The flight performance itself isn't bad, but the reason the Tiger gets so much hate is its weapons. The gun DPS is only 116, which is pretty weak, basically a pea shooter. Compared to other light fighters like the F1, M3, and Thunder, the gun damage is way too low. On top of that, it carries 4 standard IR missiles, but those missiles have a poor turn rate. So yeah, the armament is pretty underwhelming overall. But if we look at the F5's strengths, the Tiger has a high max firing time of 8.33 seconds, meaning you can sustain gunfire for a much longer period. Then there's bullet velocity. The round speed is also on the faster side. Check this out. Among light fighters, the F1 and Mirage M3 have a bullet speed of just 2970, which is roughly half of the F5's. When your bullet velocity is high, you have an easier time landing gun damage even on enemies that are trying to run away. So why did I put the F5 in D tier instead of F tier? With Upgrade 2.0, it's become easier to push up the gun's damage output. Because the max firing time is significantly longer, you can slot more B-category gun options. And you can also use options that improve the IR missile turn rate, which helps compensate for the F5's weak armament more effectively. That's why I put it in D tier. Next up, the Super Sabre F100 goes into B tier. Technically, the Super Sabre is classified as a medium fighter. But personally, I think any jet carrying rockets should be categorized as an attacker. Looking at the specs, the Super Sabre has 135 HP and a somewhat disappointing mid-tier turn rate of 35.1 degrees. However, with a sustained turn time in the 9-second range, it holds up fine in extended turning fights. And looking at the gun stats, the gun DPS is an impressive 211. It has a gun DPS similar to the A4 and A6, and the bullet speed is 5580, same as the F5 Tiger we just talked about. Because it has such high bullet velocity, you'll find that gun damage lands really well even against enemies trying to escape. So the flight performance is decent, it carries rockets, and the gun damage is solid. Then why can't it go above B tier? Well, as you know, there are simply better jets sitting above it. So the Super Sabre stays in B tier. Next, the Mirage M3 goes into C tier. The Mirage M3 is less of an all-rounder and more of a situational jet. Depending on how you look at it, you could rate it higher or lower, but fundamentally, this jet is all in on straight-line acceleration. Both its passive and special ability reflect that. And on top of that, it's a delta wing design. So it accelerates hard in a straight line, and when you slow down and turn, you get an extra 20% turn rate buff. Because of that, this is not a jet that fights through sustained turning like other light fighters do. That's what I mean when I say it's a situational jet. Looking at the spec sheet, here's the Mirage M3. And this entire section here, all of these are light fighters. Among light fighters sorted by turn rate in descending order, the M3's turn rate is 34.7 degrees, which isn't great compared to other light fighters. So as I said, it's heavily invested in straight-line performance, which makes it better suited for air superiority or priority target roles. Looking at gun specs sorted by DPS, the Mirage M3 ranks 10th with a DPS of 240, which is actually quite high. However, as I mentioned, the bullet velocity isn't fast. So for the Mirage M3, and the F1 we'll cover later, these guns are essentially head-on only weapons. They burst out high DPS when going head-to-head, but if you try shooting at a fleeing enemy, you'll quickly feel how little the bullets actually connect. The M3 actually has the slowest bullet velocity of all jets in Metalstorm. So it's situational, and its flight performance is situational too. You need to understand those characteristics, and that's why I placed it in C tier. Next, the A6 Intruder goes into B tier. It's an attacker, right? The A6 is a bit underpowered compared to other attackers, spec-wise. Now these are all the attackers. The A6 has a lower turn rate than the A10 or Su-25, and on top of that, its roll rate is the slowest of any jet in all of Metalstorm. It's slow to change direction, the most unresponsive jet in the game. The Su-22 and Su-34 below it have turn speeds closer to a medium fighter. So they're in a different category, but the A6 is slow all around, with lower turn rate, slower turn response, and slower roll rate compared to other main attackers. All right, let's look at the weapons. These are all the attacker jets. Among attackers, the cannon DPS is also mid-tier compared to the A10 or Su-25. And bullet velocity is in the upper mid-range. So overall, the flight performance is lacking. So why is this B tier? Because its special ability, the ECM jamming, is irreplaceable. It's not that the overall flight performance is good, it's that the A6's unique ECM jamming special ability is something the game genuinely needs in certain situations. And that's why I put it in B tier. When it comes to defending against interceptors and radar missiles, or anchoring the team's positioning, the A6 is truly necessary in that role, and that's why I rate it highly. Next, the Mig-21 goes into C tier. This jet can also be a bit situational. Wait, does the Mig-21 really deserve Toby in C tier? Some of you might be questioning that. Looking at the specs, it falls in the light fighter category. Among light fighters, its turn rate isn't particularly high. But here's the interesting thing. It has the same turn speed as the F-16. So its flight performance is quite similar to the F-16. You can think of it as a slightly lower turn rate version of the F-16, basically a downgrade. And compared to other light fighters, its turning radius is quite large. So it's not a jet that makes tight circles, it sweeps wide and fast. The movement feels very dynamic and rhythmic because of that. Looking at the gun specs, the DPS is 115, which is on the weaker side. And the bullet velocity is also quite slow. So the DPS is as bad as the F5 Tiger, and the bullet velocity is as bad as the Mirage F1. It has all the worst gun qualities combined, making it pretty terrible. The only saving grace is the 6 fast-firing IR missiles, which are somewhat usable. But setting all that aside, the Mig-21's biggest strength is its special ability. It can instantly spike its straight-line speed with an explosive burst, which makes it great for things like air superiority. The Mirage M3 also has strong straight-line acceleration, but it's limited to only 3 uses. But the MiG-21 can use its straight-line acceleration ability indefinitely as long as the cooldown resets, so while it's situational in things like air superiority, it's still a usable jet. That's why I put it in C tier. Next, the A4 SkyHawk goes into A tier. I don't think we even need to look at the spec sheet for this one. The biggest thing that sets it apart from other attackers is its fast turn speed and high agility. Unlike the A-10 or Su-25, which cover an arrow range, the A4 roams freely across the entire battlefield, excels at guerrilla tactics, and quickly repositions to attack, defend, and pressure the enemy. The A4 has its own unique identity that neither jet can replicate. It's irreplaceable compared to other jets, and that's why I rate it highly and place it in A tier. Next, the J35 goes into F tier. First F tier of the video. The J35's defining feature is its special ability. Right after firing a radar missile, you can activate the special ability to immediately fire an IR missile. You're essentially firing 2 missiles at once, so if you land it right, you can on-shot even attacker jets. But other than that, there's not much to offer. Looking at the spec sheet, the gun bullet velocity is among the slowest. The J35's DPS isn't extremely low, but as I mentioned, a gun with slow bullet velocity is really only suited for head-on engagements. But unlike the Mirage M3 or F1, the J35 doesn't have a particularly high DPS either. So trying to go head-on with the J35's gun means you've got mediocre DPS on top of slow bullet velocity. The gun on this jet just feels really weak overall. The J35 just doesn't have enough to cover all battlefield situations with just one special ability as its main selling point. And that's why I put it in F tier. Next, the Mig-19 goes into S tier. I think most of you will agree with this one. It's the only jet that can ignore the enemy's flares in close-range combat and punch in a missile with massive damage. However, since it uses a beam-riding missile that requires manual guidance, the skill ceiling is definitely there. And the gun damage is also on the stronger side. The Mig-19 did receive some nerfs recently. The missile speed was slowed down a bit, and the gunfire rate was also reduced slightly. If there's one weakness on the Mig-19, it's the bullet velocity being slow. The Mig-19's DPS is quite high, but the bullet velocity is on the lower end at around 3,600. In practice, you'll definitely feel how hard it is to land gun damage on a fleeing enemy with a bullet velocity of only 3,600. Generally, you'd want around 4,500 bullet velocity before you start feeling like, oh, damage is actually going in. Anyway, the bullet velocity is a bit of a letdown, but the Mig-19's flight performance and explosive offensive power are still completely irreplaceable. That's why I placed it in S tier. Next, the F-106 DeltaDart goes into A tier. I'm going to put it ahead of the A4 SkyHawk. This one has also gone through a lot of changes in recent patches. Most notably, the nuclear missile charge rate was cut in half. You'd think that's a nerf, but along with that, the overall flight performance was improved, and missile capabilities also got better. So, the DeltaDart is no longer just a nuke-spamming jet. It's now the most capable jet among those with a low turn speed in terms of overall maneuverability. So if someone asked what jet sits at the complete opposite end of the spectrum from fast movers like the Raptor or Felon, the answer is the DeltaDart. So even if the DeltaDart isn't your main jet, you should definitely get lots of practice flying it. Back in the day, the Mirage F1 was the go-to jet for low turn speed flying, but that role has now shifted to the DeltaDart. That's the best way to think about it. It's very viable as a main jet in-game, and that's why I put it in A tier. Next, the Su-22 goes into B tier. It's an attacker, right? If I had to name two defining features of the Su-22, first, it has a high top speed, meaning it's a very mobile jet. Second, it has a rear-facing gun. It can kill enemies approaching from behind. If you asked me which attacker is the hardest to deal with when flying a light fighter, I wouldn't hesitate. It's the Su-22. It's incredibly tough. You literally can't get on its tail. And another feature of the Su-22 is that the gap between the cannon speed and rocket speed is small, so the shots group together. With Upgrade 2.0, if you equip the option that boosts rocket speed by 20%, you can land both gun and rocket damage almost simultaneously on a single aim point. That's why I placed it in B tier. Next, the Jaguar GR3 goes into F tier, though I'll put it slightly ahead of the J35. It had its glory days, so I'll at least give it that dignity. Just barely, though. The main reason I put the GR3 in F tier is its flight performance. Its sustained turn capability is basically rock bottom. It simply cannot maintain a sustained turn. The Jaguar's biggest strength used to be that its rocket speed was way faster than its gun speed, allowing you to fire rockets right at your gun's aim point simultaneously. But with Upgrade 2.0, jets like the Su-34 F4 and Su-22 can now equip options that boost rocket speed, giving them a similar ability to fire guns and rockets at the same aim point simultaneously. On top of that, there are just too many alternatives now. As I'll cover later, the Phantom has also started carrying rockets now. So the question becomes, is there any reason to fly the Jaguar with its inferior flight performance? It's just lost too much of its practical value. So as much as it hurts, I've placed the Jaguar in F tier. Next, the Mig-23 also goes into F tier. It's a bit unfortunate. This jet has the highest gun attack power of any jet in all of Metalstorm, but the price you pay for that is one of the biggest sacrifices in flight performance. The main reason I put it in F tier is, first, there are more alternatives now. Jets like the Mirage M2000 and Thunder have strong gun damage while also having better flight performance. They're the go-to examples. So is there any real reason to fly the Mig-23 right now? Its identity as the top gun damage jet has been significantly diluted, and the flight performance penalty hits really hard. That said, the Mig-23's biggest advantage is actually high-altitude play and boom and zoom-style tactics. Since it can sweep its wings, it can reach higher altitudes than you'd expect. It can play a role in diving at high speed to attack enemies, but it's still quite limited overall. That's why the Mig-23 is in F tier. Next, the F4 Phantom goes into S tier. I'm placing it ahead of the Mig-19. Personally, I'm a little concerned that the Phantom might be borderline balance breaking. That's the level of concern I have. As I mentioned earlier, if a jet carries rockets, I classify it as an attacker. But the F4 carries 6 Hunter missiles, and its special ability sharply increases its turn rate. The flight performance is already solid at medium fighter level. It carries up to 6 powerful Hunter missiles. And on top of that, it's now equipped with rockets. This goes beyond being an all-rounder attacker. It feels like a balance breaker. The F4 has skyrocketed in value to a degree that makes you question balance. If you put some time into it, I'm confident you'll find it delivers massive power across various modes, whether that's air superiority or team deathmatch. S tier. Next, the Mirage F1 also goes into C tier. It's genuinely disappointing. A year ago, I would have rated the F1 higher. But overall, it's dropped to a C-tier evaluation. As I mentioned earlier, the F1 used to be the definitive example of a jet that turns with a slow speed but tight radius. But the DeltaDart has taken over that niche, and with Upgrade 2.0, the fuselage part option 8B, the one that extends the corner speed range by 50%, has allowed jets like the F-16 to start encroaching on the F-1's territory. The F-1 is slowly losing its space in the meta, and that's a shame. And as I mentioned, the slow bullet velocity is also one of the F-1's key weaknesses in my view. Because a light fighter should be using superior maneuverability to get in the enemy's tail, not by going head-on. In that sense, the F-1's spec doesn't quite align with what I expect from a light fighter. That's part of why I rate the F-1 lower. So the F-1 goes into C tier. Next, the JA37 Viggen goes into D tier. The Viggen is also a delta-wing jet, but when you actually fly it, the difference in flight performance compared to the F-106 is stark. They're a world apart. The Viggen's biggest strength is its long-range gun with a 2-kilometer range. Looking at the spec sheet, it does have the fastest bullet velocity of all jets. But ironically, many players find that the Viggen's gun damage just doesn't seem to land well. Why isn't the damage going in? A lot of players experience this frustration. Here's why. The standard gun range is 1 kilometer. But since the Viggen has a longer range, you'll naturally start firing at 1.5 kilometers or 1.7 kilometers. When you do that, the bullet has to travel further, so relative to the target's movement, the effective speed drops. Because it has to cover more distance, the jet with the fastest bullet velocity, the Viggen, can ironically feel like its bullets travel slower relative to the target. To compensate for this, I recommend waiting until the target is within 1 km for opening fire. If you play it that way, you'll find the Viggen's gun actually connects better than you expected. But then flipping it around, if that's how you have to play it, what's the point of having a 2-kilometer gun range on the Viggen? That becomes a real head-scratcher. That's why I gave the Viggen a fairly harsh rating. D tier. Next up, the Su-25. I'm putting this in A tier. The A-10 and Su-25 have long been Theon 2 punch of dominant attacker jets, but both have received significant nerfs over time and have lost some of their edge. That said, attackers still have an identity that's uniquely their own, something irreplaceable, advantages that only attackers have. When you weave those into team play effectively, the synergy is genuinely powerful. The Su-25 as an attacker has also taken a lot of rocket nerfs. The blast radius got smaller, speed was reduced, and damage was cut, all weakening it to the point where I felt the rockets weren't quite S-tier worthy. So I dropped it to A tier. Next, I'm putting the Tornado ADV at the very front of S tier. This has been one of the most dominant OP jets in Metalstorm's history. With heavy fighter HP of 170, solid flight performance, 8 missiles, and decent guns, players were constantly asking when this thing would get nerfed. There was a lot of talk. And recently, the nerfs finally came. Turn rate dropped from 38 degrees to 37, and the decoy special ability went from covering 2 missiles to just 1. Even so, in my view, it's still a solid all-rounder across team deathmatch, air superiority, and other modes. So I'm keeping the Tornado ADV in S tier. Next up, the F-111 Aardvark. I'm placing this one in D tier. Admittedly, ranking interceptors on the same scale as other jets might not be the most meaningful comparison. But in my personal opinion, even among interceptors, the Aardvark falls into the lower tier. Carrying 6 radar missiles used to feel like an advantage, but now it's just average. Honestly, you'd want at least 8 to feel comfortable. And on top of that, the Aardvark's radar performance is significantly weaker than other interceptors. As I covered in a previous video, standard interceptors have a radar range of 14.3 km. The Aardvark only has 9.5 km. That means you can't immediately detect enemies when they spawn. That's a pretty significant disadvantage. So I've placed the Aardvark lower than other interceptors, in D tier. Next, the F-14 Tomcat goes into B tier. As I mentioned, the Tomcat operates a bit differently from other interceptors. Its flight performance is quite good, making missile evasion easier. And the F-14 seems to have gotten even better with Upgrade 2.0. The Tomcat carries 4 radar missiles and 4 IR missiles, right? Those 4 IR missiles already extend to a range of about 5.6 kilometers at high altitude due to the Tomcat's passive ability. But if you also equip the Upgrade 2.0 option that boosts IR missile range by 20%, you can push it up to nearly 7 kilometers. At that point, the Tomcat's IR missiles are no longer just for close-range harassment. They can cover medium range, too. The value of having 8 missiles total expands significantly. The combat capability and strategic flexibility improve quite a bit because of this, and that's why I rate the Tomcat highly and moved it up to B tier. Next, the Mig-29 goes into D tier, reluctantly. The Mig-29's defining feature was being a medium fighter with the fast turn speed OFA heavy fighter. That was its main identity. It was good for evading enemy missiles quickly and forcing opponents into at-offensive mode, but beyond that, the guns weren't strong, the missile specs weren't great either, and it felt somewhat bland overall. With Upgrade 2.0, most jets found ways to address weaknesses and amplify strengths, sharpening their identity. But the Mig-29 feels like Upgrade 2.0 didn't really give it anything special to work with. Its role and identity have become even more blurred, and I feel its practical usefulness has dropped further. So I placed it in D tier. Next, the F-16 Fighting Falcon goes into S tier. I'll place it behind the A-10 and ahead of the F-4 Phantom. The F-16 is the definitive example of the best overall flight performance in Metalstorm. It's been heavily used in air superiority, and it's one of the most favored jets by top players in one-on-one situations. And it feels like Upgrade 2.0 gave it even more wings. With speed and acceleration improvements, the F-16's already fast flight performance and agility have reached a level that other jets simply can't replicate. Personally, I also feel that Upgrade 2.0 benefits the assault gun more than the standard built-in gun. So the F-16's gun has also received a solid buff from Upgrade 2.0. If you fly it yourself, I think you'll be surprised. Wait, the F-16 was this good? I'm confident that's how you'll feel. Next, the J-10 goes into D tier, unfortunately. I debated whether to put it in F or D. But even a dull knife has its edge. The J-10's biggest strength is the high-accuracy missiles it carries. Both IR and radar missiles, they have the highest accuracy rating among all 43 jets in Metalstorm. But the flight performance and gun to back up those missiles are severely lacking. It's a one-trick missile pony. It can be great if you use those missiles well, but in actual gameplay, you'll definitely feel the frustration in terms of overall operation. That's why I place the J-10 in D tier. Next, the Mig-31 Foxhound goes into C tier. As I said, it helps to evaluate interceptors separately from other jets. Clearly, the Foxhound is a step above the Aardvark as an interceptor. It has the ability to boom and zoom at thigh speed, and it carries mid-range IR missiles with a 6-kilometer range, making it capable of countering stealth jets. However, with jets like the Rafale and Mighty Dragon emerging as strong counter-stew interceptors, the interceptor's standing in the meta has narrowed somewhat. That's why I'm placing the Foxhound in C tier. Next, the Legacy Hornet goes into D tier. Since the Legacy Hornet got its passive ability, there's a sense that gun damage and such land a bit better, but it's all well-rounded. Jack-of-all-trades type jet without any strong lean in any direction. But that also means there's no one standout advantage you can point to. In my view, one of the Legacy Hornet's biggest weaknesses is its low top speed. It's slow. That makes it pretty hard to use effectively in air superiority. One positive is that it's a medium fighter carrying 4 guided missiles, so it can operate in a more offensive position to some extent. But honestly, compared to other jets, it's hard to point to anything that truly stands out as a clear advantage. So I'm placing it in D tier. Next, the JF-17 Thunder goes into C tier. I'll put it toward the front, though. The JF-17 is a light fighter, and personally I felt there was a design flaw. It doesn't carry guided missiles. In light fighter dogfights, there are many situations where you need to lock on and fire missiles faster than the opponent, and not having that option. While carrying an active radar missile instead felt like a real disadvantage tome. And while the gun does high damage, it overheats quickly. The short max firing time felt like a significant downside too. But with Upgrade 2.0, using options that reduce radar missile lock-on time, combined with equipping the gun with AIAA configuration to extend max firing time by 50%, has made it noticeably more viable. That improvement is definitely noticeable. But it's still fair to say the Thunder falls short in covering what the F-16 or Mig-19 can do among light fighters. The condition for activating its special ability also requires flying very close to terrain. That's one of the operational constraints tied to the JF-17's flight characteristics. That's my assessment. So in the end, I'm placing it in C tier. Next, the Su-27. I'm placing this one in D tier. Heavy fighters have been somewhat overlooked in Metalstorm for a while now. Once you take away the advantages of high HP and fast turn speed, the sustained turn is too weak for extended turning fights, and the gun isn't particularly impressive either. The Su-27 carries guided missiles, so it needs to engage at close to mid-range, but the underwhelming flight performance made that a real frustration. That said, Upgrade 2.0 options that improve turn responsiveness do at least provide some CPR to these struggling heavy fighters. But even with that, there's clearly a ceiling on how high heavy fighters can climb in the tier list. That's my thinking, so I'm placing it in D tier for now. Next, the A-10. Naturally, it goes into A tier. It's the flagship attacker. The A-10's gun is simply in a league of its own. Even without missiles or rockets, the offensive power it delivers is tremendous. And the A-10's max firing time of 12.5 seconds is incredibly powerful. So even if Upgrade 2.0 applies debuffs that reduce max firing time while increasing attack power, it barely affects the A-10 at all. The already powerful gun has gotten even stronger with Upgrade 2.0. It's a bit slow overall, but what makes the A-10 special is untouchable. There's nothing else like it. So it goes solidly into A tier. Next, the F-15 Eagle. I'll try putting this in C tier. As I mentioned, it's in the same heavy fighter class as the Su-27, but in my view, the F-15 benefits the most from Upgrade 2.0 among all heavy fighters. Looking at the cannon specs, the F-15's max firing time is actually longer than you'd expect. So applying options that increase attack power while reducing max firing time isn't a problem. Other heavy fighters have a max firing time in the 4-second range. That makes it costly to stack attack options, but the F-15 has a bit more flexibility there. And the bullet velocity is on the faster side as well. Generally speaking, assault guns tend to have faster bullet velocity. As I mentioned, the reason I prefer assault guns over standard built-in guns is that their responsiveness and aggression in combat feels significantly better. Coming back to the F-15, if you apply Upgrade 2.0 options that boost flight performance and also enhance gun damage, you'll feel a noticeable improvement over other heavy fighters. That's why I'm placing it in C tier. Next, the Mirage M2000 goes into B tier. I'll place it at the front of the B tier group. I used to rate jets with poor flight performance, specifically weak sustained turn, a bit lower. But the more I fly the Mirage M2000, the more I feel it has an irreplaceable identity of its own. That's genuinely how it feels. What's disappointing, though, is that the Upgrade 2.0 options don't really help with the M2000's weak sustained turn at all. And that's a shame. But from experience, the most effective way to fly the M2000, in my opinion, is to equip ideal maneuver at gun level 20. That's the best way to bring out the M2000's flight performance while aggressively leveraging its powerful gun DPS. Of course, non-modified versions can't do that. So in my view, there will be a significant difference in flight performance and usability between modified and non-modified M2000s. In terms of modified performance, I think it could reach A tier, but for the non-modified version, there are some clear limitations, so I'll place the M2000 in B tier. Next, the Su-30. Without hesitation, I'm putting it dead last in F tier. I've been hoping that the Su-30 and other heavy fighters would get a meaningful buff at some point. I was so optimistic that I was leveling it to level 20 when everyone else wasn't even bothering. But at this point, if someone asked me what the weakest jet in the game is, I'd say the Su-30. Compared to other heavy fighters, carrying active radar missiles feels frustrating, and despite having high HP, even using it for harassment feels off. It just doesn't click. And there are just too many alternatives to the Su-30. There's no debate here. I'm putting it at the very back of the list. Next, the Su-33. It's also D tier, but I'll place it at the very front of D tier. Among heavy fighters, I personally prefer jets that carry guided missiles. The combination of fast flight performance and fast turn speed, with the ability to instantly launch missiles and take down enemies as you encounter them. That's what I consider the real charm of flying a heavy fighter. But regardless, moving from D tier to C tier is held back by the gun performance being too weak. As I mentioned, the F-15 has a long max firing time, giving it room to work with, but the Su-33 doesn't have that luxury. So I'll place it at the front of D tier. Next, the Super Hornet. I debated this one quite a bit, but I'll place it toward the back of C tier. The Super Hornet is a jet with very polarizing opinions. It's a heavy fighter, but its turn speed is at medium fighter level. That's another mismatch. But the top speed is actually very fast. Acceleration is slow, though, so it's a bit of a mixed bag all around. Flying it compared to other heavy fighters like the Su-33 or F-15, it feels slower and more sluggish, but Upgrade 2.0 actually provides meaningful help in improving the Super Hornet. One of the most notable examples is its gun cooling special ability, gun cooling. Because of that, stacking gun damage upgrades without issue becomes much easier, just like the F-15. On top of that, adding options that significantly reduce radar missile lock-on time, combined with the passive ability that further cuts lock-on time when the enemy's HP is low, all of that makes the Super Hornet a very capable missile carrier, maximizing the value of its 8 missiles. So despite its existing weaknesses, with the right Upgrade 2.0 tuning, it becomes quite flyable. That's my thinking, so I placed it toward the back of C tier. Next, the Gripen goes in the middle of B tier. The Gripen is a highly situational jet. It has the lowest HP of all 43 jets at just 95. Even a graze from a gun can feel like it kills you. It's a light fighter, but not one you fly like a typical light fighter. The special ability, camouflage, is truly irreplaceable and unlike anything else. The ability to disrupt the enemy team, going in cloaked, throwing the enemy lines into chaos, and creating openings for your teammates to move in and attack is outstanding. It also lets you keep contesting objectives in air superiority while evading enemy gunfire, which is a unique advantage only the Gripen has. That's why I placed it in B tier. The reason it can't go to A tier is the low HP and the weak sustained turn capability. Those factors held it back. So the Gripen stays in B tier. Next, the Su-34 goes into C tier. I'll put it toward the front, though. The Su-34 and Su-22 are quite similar in their characteristics among attackers. Both are fairly fast and mobile, moving quicker than other attackers, and their rocket speed is quite fast on both, which, as I mentioned earlier, makes it easy to land gun and rocket damage at the same aim point. That versatility makes it one of the better jets for landing rocket damage, not just in head-on situations, but also against laterally moving enemies. That's why I placed it slightly higher than the lower-tier options. However, its turn rate is a bit lower than the main attacker lineup, and it does have some situational tendencies. So I placed it slightly lower than the main attackers. Next, the Rafale goes to the very front of A tier. As you all know, the Rafale has incredibly powerful IR missiles. The tracking ability on them. They curve in like taffy. The Rafale's missiles are genuinely hard to dodge. It carries premium IR missiles, and beyond those missiles, when you actually play it, the Rafale's gun damage is also impressively solid. The DPS itself isn't exceptionally high, but whether you're attacking from the front, rear, or side, the cannon damage connects consistently. And the base flight performance, while the sustained turn is a little weak, is at a manageable level. On top of that, equipping the 8B fuselage upgrade in Upgrade 2.0 provides a lot of breathing room for sustained turning. So I rate the Rafale very highly, and I'm placing it at the very front of A tier. Next, the Su-35 goes toward the front of C tier. I'm evaluating it on the same level as the F-15 Eagle. The main reason is that the Su-35 also has a gun cooling special ability. So with Upgrade 2.0, you can freely stack gun damage buffs without any issues. And just like the F-15, by slightly trading some HP in the fuselage part for turn responsiveness buffs, you can significantly reduce the sluggish heavy fighter feel and actually hold your own in turning fights. That's the impression I got. So I'll place the Su-35 toward the front of C tier as well. Next up, the Su-47. I'm placing it just behind the Su-27 in D tier. The Su-47 did receive a buff recently. The flight control loss, getting hit by an enemy missile during a full turn causing loss of control, has been removed. That's genuinely good news. And the Su-47's strength is that it can fire missiles rapidly in quick succession. The flight performance is solid too, but when you actually fly it, the movement feels a bit erratic. Weird. Something feels off. When you try to maneuver for gun attacks, the response just feels strange. Personally, the movement just feels a bit odd to me. So while it works well as a missile carrier, for all-around play, I just can't quite get comfortable with the Su-47. So just like other heavy fighters, I'm placing it in D tier. Next, the Typhoon goes toward the back of A tier. A traditional powerhouse. Its high flight performance made it a standout performer in air superiority, but the Typhoon's biggest weakness is its poor sustained turn. Sustained turning just doesn't work well. But since the special ability is fuel replenishment, it compensates for the weak sustained turn by using that refuel ability to keep flying. Looking more closely, though, the Typhoon doesn't leave a great impression with its guns. There's a mix of pros and cons, but even a dull knife has its edge, and at the Typhoon's level of flight performance, it can deliver standout results in air superiority and similar modes, so placing it in a higher tier makes sense. That's my judgment, so I'll place it toward the back of A tier. Next, the KF-21. I debated this one quite a bit, but I'll place it in the mid-range of B tier. The KF-21's overall flight performance is a slight step below the F-22 Raptor. Earlier, I said the F-16 and Mig-21 are downgrade versions of each other. Similarly here, the KF-21 Boromai is a step below the Raptor. But it has a fast turn speed, so you can fly it in a very dynamic style. But the KF-21 also has its own strengths, a total of 8 missiles. It's a medium fighter that can use 8 missiles total, including the drones. And when you use the drone in defense mode like the ADV's decoy, it's far better than the ADV, because it can defend against both radar missiles and IR missiles. That makes it quite helpful in those situations. When the Boromai first launched, I thought the 37.8-degree turn rate was a bit lacking. But now looking at it, the ADV's turn rate was also nerfed to 37 degrees. So relatively speaking, it actually looks better now. Personally, I've come to feel that the KF-21 is better suited for fast flares over disruptive flares. Moving fast, weaving through terrain features, securing objectives, when you actively play into that style, you can really maximize the KF-21's strengths. So I placed it around the middle of B tier. Next, the F-35 Lightning. I have some reservations about this one. I'm placing it toward the back of D tier. The F-35 does have an irreplaceable passive skill. The satellite locking passive which continuously detects and tracks enemy positions, is genuinely good. But for all the promise that ability offers, in actual play the radar missile lock-on is too slow, and it falls short for harassment purposes. HP is also low, and while the gun is somewhat usable, the flight performance in close-range combat feels slightly lacking in some hard-to-pinpoint way. If you fly it specifically to leverage the passive ability as a backup support jet, it manages. But even then, it falls short in enough ways that I placed it in D tier. If you want to actually get value out of it, make sure to equip the Upgrade 2.0 option that boosts missile lock-on speed by 20% or more. That's a must. That way, you'll at least be able to get more mileage out of the Lightning's passive ability. Next, the F-22 Raptor. No debate. This goes into S tier. I'll put it toward the back of S tier, though. The Raptor has a unique identity that's all its own. Fast turn speed combined with a high turn rate creates truly exceptional flight performance. The evasion play that comes from this unmatched turn speed is something no other jet can replicate. It's genuinely standout. And carrying an assault gun instead of the standard built-in gun is also a meaningful advantage. The gun damage lands well too. Comparatively, it actually connects better than the Su-57 in gunfights. And the F-22 Raptor's special ability is flare reload, so at level 20 modification combined with fast flares, the utility becomes even higher. That's what I've found. So after Upgrade 2.0, the Raptor has become even more effective not just in air superiority, but also in team deathmatch. That's my take, so I've confidently placed it in S tier. Next, the J-20 Mighty Dragon goes toward the front of B tier. I'll put it slightly ahead of the F-14 Tomcat. In my ranking of interceptors specifically, I rate the Mighty Dragon and F-14 highest, followed by the Foxhound and the Aardvark at the bottom. The Mighty Dragon's biggest strength as an interceptor is that it carries 6 flares and has a flare reload ability. That means it can use up to 12 flares total. So it can operate in the air for a much longer sustained period. It did get nerfed recently. Missile accuracy was reduced and the interceptor missile count dropped from 6 to 4. Even so, it still has the inherent advantages of a stealth jet. And among interceptors, it's the one that can operate most freely at high altitude, most faithful to the true identity of an interceptor. That's my assessment, so I'm placing it at the very front of B tier, top among interceptors. Next up, the Falcon. I'm placing the Falcon toward the back of A tier. Ahead of the Typhoon. The Raptor and Falcon are both stealth jets, and they're often compared against each other. But personally, I rate the Raptor higher than the Falcon. One of the reasons is actually the gun. As I mentioned, I prefer assault guns. And looking at the actual gun specs, the Raptor's gun is significantly better. The most notable thing here is bullet velocity. The Raptor's bullet velocity is 5580, quite high. But the Falcon is at 4,140, noticeably lower. At first, I only sensed this through feel. When you try shooting the Falcon's gun at a fleeing enemy, it's one of those guns where you go, wow, this really isn't landing. But on the flip side, the Raptor's gun connects pretty well even against enemies running away. I wondered what the difference was, and then checking the spec sheet, I realized it's the bullet velocity. That's what makes the difference. And it's not shown on this sheet, but the Raptor also has a much higher fire rate. Basically, assault guns shoot more densely more bullets per second, while precision guns like the Falcons fire more sparsely. So the actual hit rate from the gun also differs quite a bit. Pretty ironic, right? Because the Raptor's special ability is gun cooling. Even though it's a jet built around guns, the base gun performance and specs on the Falcon aren't actually that impressive. But even a dull knife has its edge. Aside from the gun, the Raptor and Falcon are fairly close in overall flight performance. So there's a distinction between S-tier and A-tier, but I'll still categorize the Falcon as a high-tier jet. That wraps up the tier table for all 43 jets. Some of you might find your thoughts align with mine, while others might feel, hey, this doesn't match how I see it at all. And that's totally valid. There's no single right answer here. This is just how I see it as Bomb YG. Take it as a reference. And hopefully you picked up some info along the way that you didn't know before. I hope this helped you enjoy Metalstorm even a little bit more. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and hit the like button. This has been Bomb from KTG. See you next time.